as the government keeps taking more and more of your money, and they're now looking for other excuses to do it, or just to destroy your livelihood, make food more expensive, and make it more difficult to make ends meet, all in the name of making the weather gooder. Yes, you heard that correctly, as of course, for many years now, a lot of central controllers have been using the excuse of the weather in order to, of course, not just trample and destroy human freedom, but also economic prosperity. And one of the biggest ways that they're doing it right now is to go after the food supply chain, as Ireland is looking to take out 200,000 cows in order to fight the weather. Yes, you heard that correctly. In the latest effort to reduce emission from agriculture, Ireland is setting forward plans to take out the life of 200,000 cows. An action that is not just horrific and cruel, but would of course significantly raise the price of meat inside of the Ireland, and goes along a part of the UN 2030 vision pushed on by a lot of secret society members that do unspeakable things in coffins, like John Kerry, that now have come out and officially said in order to meet net zero goals, they have to stop farmers from growing food. Yes, these are the words from John Kerry, an initiated man into many secret societies that now is working with the Biden White House in order to make the weather gooder. Here are this psycho's own words himself, as of course he flies around on private jets and justifies it by saying pretty much that he's more important than anybody else.
Agriculture contributes about 33% of all the emissions of the world. Depending a little bit on how you count it, but it's anywhere from 26 to 33. And we can't get to net zero. We don't get this job done unless agriculture is front and center as part of the solution. But with
Now, what is that solution, you ask? Well, it's probably something that the New York Times is hinting at today, as they're releasing more propaganda that, of course, is centered around the larger depopulation agenda and narrative that you see so conveniently pushed on by a lot of central controllers. As their latest New York Times Magazine piece reads, quote, "Is it wrong to bring a child into our warming world?" Specifically trying to gaslight and manipulate any kind of useful lemming reading this trash that they somehow have a responsibility not to procreate in order to make the weather gooder. Again, a lot of this is just nonsensical and boils down to people trying to get more power and control over individuals, making our lives more inconvenient, making food more expensive, making travel almost impossible unless you're one of the elites individuals with private jets that could just fly around willy-nilly anywhere and everywhere they want at the snap of a finger, while people are now told they can't have short-haul flights because they're not rich enough to afford private jets. In France, they just banned all short-haul flights. Why? In order to push a climate-friendly agenda. And we know it's not about climate, it's not about carbon, it's about you, reducing you, getting rid of you.
So, John Kerry, Skull and Bones, about halfway through that video. Did anyone's record screech to a stop for tonight? No, probably not. But tonight's guest, John Klydzik, in his book, School World Order, we're going to talk a lot about Skull and Bones. I have a feeling. And I just wanted to show you a couple artifacts, because John Kerry is part of a long lineage. And we're going to go to the history blueprint in a minute, but I just wanted to show you a little artifact. This is how the order, Skull and Bones, 322, the Yale Secret Society, controls education in this country. I once upon a time paid $80 for this little tiny pamphlet by Anthony Sutton. And imagine my chagrin.
Was it reprinted by Stan Monteith?
Well, it's in this.
Something?
It's chapter 8 in his book that you can get for $20.
Right.
And you get a whole book with it, right? And then there's also Chris Milligan edited Fleshing Out Skull and Bones that has Sutton's work, along with other people, including I thought Charlotte Iserby was in here, but multiple authors being brought together and marshaled in this great big thick book here. But Kerry is not just a Skull and Bonesman, right? Now, I do believe, this is my opinion, this is one of the few times you'll hear the opinion of myself on the show. I do believe that JFK was referring to the Skull and Bones Secret Society in his Secret Society speech to the Press Association. People say it's communism. I said it's Skull and Bones rumor that they created. Communism doesn't have secret oaths. They're not in control, like McGeorge Bundy and all these other people that surrounded Kennedy. Skull and Bones, Rhodes Scholars. Those two groups, predominant.
Bush family was
the Nazis, the people who funded the Nazis. Surprise, everybody. They're in a German death cult at the East India Company University in New Haven, Connecticut, right? So put two and two together, start to get 4, add another 2, get 6. This is how it works. So these types of facts now bring us to John Kerry in the history blueprint. Now, what you need to know is the John in John Kerry he has a middle name named Forbes. So who is the Forbes family? Oh, they're one of the first families of Boston, the Boston Brahmins, America's Eastern establishment. You know, the Anglo-American establishment, it's families like these. They're involved in the old China trade, which is code for the opium trade. Free trade is also the opium trade too, if you look it up. Russell and Company is the founding family that got the 1832, when Skull and Bones is founded, that 1832 is when the East India Company privatized its opium monopoly. So instead of just East India Company, now you have privateers like Russell and Company that become very wealthy in America and help to facilitate, right? And then the list of billionaires and all these sorts of things that come from here, right? Because it's the same. John Murray Forbes was the captain that was the opium smuggler. So if you wanted to do that history, he went to Phillips Andover Academy, just like H.W. Bush, right? So you can go to Andover and who are the people? Oh, Godfrey Rockefeller, Richard Carey, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Norman Dodd. The whistleblower. It tells us about the Reese Committee and these nonprofit foundations. He also went to Phillips Andover, and actually Prince Al-Walid should be below. Nathan Hale, who I mentioned this morning, what is this? 10 hours ago when I started Q&A with the students, Nathan Hale came up in Cloak and Gown, how the university systems were taken over by MI6, CIA, the communist milieu that was in between them, right? Because it was being run by intelligence. So even just the founding, academies in our country that have been training these people. Here's DeMorenschildt. I'm sorry, nephew of DeMorenschildt.
Mm-hmm.
So H.W. Bush, Phillips Andover, Nazi financier. John Kerry's right there with him. In fact, he ran against H.W. Bush's son, also a Skull and Bonesman, in 2008. Or 2004.
Oh, 2004. Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to John Murray Forbes and then John Forbes Kerry, what did Kerry oversee? BCCI. Tony.
Yeah. So
the Kerry Commission.
The Kerry Commission
Committee.
in the late 90s. Yeah. That's a
terrorism, narcotics, and international operations that Skull and Bones are running, Tony. So he's in charge of running the Skull and Bones investigation.
Yeah, it's almost like he's charged with making sure they detail and document the history of what took place and make sure that no major reveals that are too particular to people that are currently in power are, leaked through. So it's interesting because Whitney Webb in chapter 7 of her first volume, and then a number of times in volume 2, quotes that very specific commission because all of it links back to BCCI in regards to drug running, arms dealing, that sort of thing. So, and
just real quick for the audience, BCCI. Whoa.
Yeah. Whoa. Just read chapter 7 of volume 1 of Whitney Webb's One Nation Under Blackmail. And that's the entire
Edmund Safra and George Soros. Okay, so BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International. I've got 5 or 6 books at least on this topic, right?
Yeah, easily.
This ties in all the narco terrorism funding, not all of it, but the majority of it, the Iran-Contra stuff, the Mujahideen,
yeah.
All this stuff that was being laundered right up to 9/11, right? This is all Robert Maxwell.
It's like all those proxy groups.
Killed. Yeah, Adnan Khashoggi, the Bin Mahfouz.
And that's where you see, because Epstein had a connection with obviously Khashoggi. It's as if he was immersed in the network in the 80s, understood its operations, got to see behind, the veil, so to speak, and then try to sort of reinvest in a new version of it in the 1990s. It's as if this whole thing happens with BCCI and all of a sudden Epstein right afterwards seems to take over and is buying up the same Southern Air Transport and Polar Cargo that was used during BCCI to do all this nefarious air arms trading, flying across, and it was actually his boss. Was it Wexner at the time who bought it up? And
the Limited needs to buy Air America
to fly it to Hong Kong,
but they're not flying heroin and opium and stuff like that. Right?
Nothing to see there, nothing to worry about. It's
so narco traffickers investigate narco traffickers, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly. Exactly. That's what it is. It's like Alan Dulles being the head of the Warren Commission.
So now with that context, if you remember, John Kerry's there talking in his purple tie because that says, I'm with the royalty. right? When Hillary came out after her loss and they were wearing purple, remember this is their symbol that we might lose politically, but we're in control geopolitically, right? So Kerry's standing there like the big Herman Munster that he is, and he's got his purple tie on, and he's telling you that you can't have the cows. Now that dude, he's got a yacht, he's got a plane, he's got probably an island and stuff, you know. He's not on the same playing field as you. You guys aren't even playing the same game. Why does he get to have a right to say what you put in your pie hole? He's not doing it for him. Why should you have to do it for him? Is he your bio Jesus? Is he your carbon neutral Jesus? Who convinced John Kerry that carbon neutral is a good idea, that we got to get all this stuff to zero? I don't know who made that argument. I don't even know that it's made in public, but those people at the top all sure believe it. And they think that Ireland needs to kill all their cows. Right. Wasn't that the story? 200,000 cows are just going to slaughter them?
It's already happening in the Netherlands.
Yes, I was going to say.
Yeah, so like it's what they're doing is, I think the World Economic Forum and the partners, the global community of the Fortune 500 corporate, international corporations come together. I think what they're envisioning is that they're not going to be able to stop humans from eating meat just with bug production or lab grown meat. It's going to be too hard to sell. People don't want to change their habits. And quite frankly, we've done this for thousands of years, and it's the most nutritionally available and best option for humans. So I think they're going to just try to price the world out of meat production. They're going to make it so, and even if the CBDCs fail, they'll just make it so even the average person, what we experience as a middle class sort of individual today who has income to be able to buy excess goods, won't be able to afford even something as simple as like a flank steak, for God's sakes. That's, I think, what they're attempting to do with this. At least that's one of my theories associated with it, is looking at some of the evidence that's coming out, both in the Netherlands, which major pushback has happened there. I mean, there's a whole grassroots party that won like 26 or 24 elections recently to their parliament. And it's specifically to support the Dutch farmers as a backlash against it. But I don't know how much that's going to be. And it seems like it might be enough to push against the main legislation against them, but there's still a lot of power plays going on there. So we'll see how that plays out. But Ireland's looking to push the same thing. UK's not far behind. Certainly Germany's right behind them. So it's, we'll have to see. And obviously America, they've, Castor and Alton Fitz has made this point many times. If you look at what's been happening in America, obviously Bill Gates buying up farmland all over the country, but then look at like feedlots. Look at look at the regulations associated with how you're allowed to slaughter cattle or livestock in general. Like, it's making it so it's more and more centralized. So it's harder just to be like a local grower. You have to send it to a state sanctioned butcher, right? And then you're sort of out of your control. You can't even butcher your own animal. They make it very hard because of the regulations for our health and safety, apparently, to even have the autonomy to be able to grow locally and produce for ourselves without, you can do it for yourself, but if you sell it,
private membership association is a phrase.
That's what you'd have to do. That's the way. That is a reasonable workaround.
Someone who's got cows, get to the PMA. I'll find a butcher to come and we can all do business outside of those regulations. That's legally how it's done.
It is legal. Yeah, that is legal.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions. We can get into the show, we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come